All right, so have you ever like glanced at a map and thought, wait a second, am I seeing things right?
I know what you mean.
That's what happened to me with the Gulf of Mexico, or should I say the Gulf of America.
Yeah, it's definitely, it's raising some eyebrows.
It's not just some internet rumor or anything like that.
Hmm.
This is on official maps. We're talking Google Maps, Apple Maps. But here's the thing. It seems like folks in the U.S. are seeing Gulf of America. People in Mexico still see Gulf of Mexico.
Mm.
And the rest of the world's kind of getting both.
Oh, wow.
So for our deep dive today, let's unpack this a little bit. What's going on here?
Yeah.
Is this just a name on a map, or is there something more to it?
Well, this whole thing, it all goes back to a 2025 executive order by President Trump to actually rename the Gulf of Mexico.
So it's official then?
Well, officially proposed, yeah.
Okay.
The order, it directed the Geographic Names Information System, or GNIS,
All right.
to make the change. And of course, companies like Google and Apple, they usually follow their lead.
Mm-hmm.
But the interesting thing is this isn't the only renaming in that order. Remember the attempt to change Denali back to Mount McKinley?
Right.
That one hasn't taken effect on maps yet.
So some names stick, some don't.
Exactly.
I guess it's not as simple as just updating a database or something.
No, not at all. There's a lot more at play here. You've got, different realities being presented depending on where you are in the world, which, as you can imagine, has the potential to cause some confusion,
Sure.
especially for travelers or researchers.
Right. People relying on, having consistent information.
Consistent geographical information, exactly.
Yeah, that makes sense. Imagine trying to, book a flight or do some research when the maps themselves are telling you different stories.
Exactly. It raises all these questions about what maps are even for. Are they just neutral tools?
Right.
Or are they reflecting something more?
Do you think people actually care about this, or is it more of a symbolic battle for politicians?
I think it's probably a little bit of both. I
Right.
mean, on the one hand, you've got those practical concerns, about consistency and accuracy. But then on the other hand, names carry a lot of weight historically, culturally.
Yeah.
You got to think about it. Maps aren't just lines on paper. They reflect power dynamics, history, even politics.
Okay, so how does this all play out with the Gulf of Mexico or America or both?
Well, in this case, you've got President Trump pushing for Gulf of America, but then you have Mexican President Claudia Sheinbaum coming out and saying, for us and for the whole world, it is still the Gulf of Mexico.
Oh, wow.
So clearly there's some symbolic weight attached to these names, and it's not just a simple matter of, which one is correct.
So it's a power struggle playing out on a map.
That's a good way to put it.
That's fascinating.
And remember back in 2015 when President Obama renamed Mount McKinley to Denali?
Right, to acknowledge the cultural heritage of the Alaskan Native people.
Exactly. And now we're seeing this push to kind of undo that change.
Right.
And it highlights how, names can be so deeply tied to cultural identity and how maps can be used to assert dominance or, even control a narrative.
Wow, so this is getting pretty deep.
Yeah.
Simple glance at Google Maps, and we're already talking about power struggles and cultural identity.
Yeah, it's all connected.
Okay, so we've established this name change is causing some waves, but has this sort of thing happened before? Are there other examples of maps being manipulated throughout history?
Oh, absolutely. History is full of examples of maps being used as tools of power and propaganda. I mean, think about the way colonial powers redrew maps to reflect their own empires, often erasing or minimizing the presence of indigenous populations.
That's a good point. It's easy to forget that maps hasn't always been about, objective representation.
Right.
They've often served a purpose, a way to solidify control or push a particular narrative.
Exactly. And even today, we see how even subtle changes in maps can have big implications, like the way borders are drawn, the size and prominence of certain areas, even the choice of colors and symbols. All of these things can influence how we perceive the world.
Can simply changing a name on a map truly change how we see a place? I mean, the Gulf is still the Gulf, right?
That's a really fascinating question. There's actually a whole field of study called toponymy.
Toponymy.
Yeah, it focuses on place names, and their significance and research suggests that names can have a real impact on our perceptions and even our behavior.
Really? So calling it the Gulf of America might actually make people think of it differently than if it were still the Gulf of Mexico?
Potentially, yeah. Names can evoke certain images, emotions, associations.
Right.
Gulf of America might evoke feelings of, national pride or ownership for some, while Gulf of Mexico might conjure up different images or cultural connections.
That makes me wonder about other contested place names around the world. I'm thinking about places like the Sea of Japan, which is called the East Sea by Korea, or the Falkland Islands, which Argentina claims is the Islas Malvinas.
Right.
These aren't just geographical designations. They're wrapped up in history, identity, and often conflict.
You're hitting on a crucial point here. These disputes over place names, they often reflect deeper tensions and power imbalances. And as our world becomes increasingly interconnected and globalized, these kinds of clashes are only going to become more common.
So what does all of this mean for us, the average person looking at a map on our phone? Should we even care about these name changes?
Well, I think on a practical level, it's important to be aware of these inconsistencies,
Yeah.
especially if you're traveling or doing research.
Right.
Imagine trying to find information about a place when there are multiple names floating around.
Yeah. Talk about confusing.
But beyond the practical considerations, there's a deeper level of awareness that's important to cultivate.
Yeah.
We need to be critical consumers of maps and understand that they're not always objective representations of reality.
Okay.
They're products of human choices,
Right.
influenced by power, politics, and culture.
So it's not enough to just read a map. We need to read between the lines.
Exactly. Ask yourself, who created this map? What are their motivations? What stories are being told and whose voices are being left out?
Wow, this is really eye-opening. I'm starting to see maps in a whole new light. They're not just tools for navigation. They're windows into history, culture, and power dynamics.
And that's the beauty of it. Maps can be fascinating objects of study in their own right. They can
Wow.
teach us about the world, about ourselves, and about the ways we've chosen to represent our surroundings throughout history.
This has been such a thought-provoking conversation. We've gone from a simple question about a name change on Google Maps to a deep dive into the history of cartography, the power of names, and the complex ways that maps shape our understanding of the world.
And the best part is we've only just scratched the surface. There's so much more to explore here.
I know I'm already thinking about all the other maps and place names I want to investigate further. This really makes you realize how much we take for granted when it comes to something as seemingly simple as a map.
Indeed, and as we navigate this increasingly complex world with all its diverse perspectives and contested narratives, a critical understanding of maps and their influence is more important than ever.
Well said. So as we wrap up this deep dive, what's one key takeaway you want our listener to walk away with?
I think the most important thing is to remember that maps are not neutral. They are powerful tools that can be used to inform, persuade, and even manipulate. So the next time you look at a map, don't just take it at face value. Ask questions, be critical, and think about the stories that are being told and the stories that might be missing.
And on that note, I think it's time to wrap up this deep dive. We've covered a lot of ground, from the practical implications of the Gulf of America name change to the broader historical and cultural context of maps and place names.
It's been quite a journey, and we hope you, our listener, have found it as enlightening as we have.
I know I have. This conversation has definitely changed the way I look at maps.
Yeah.
I'll never see them the same way again. It's interesting, right? Because we're talking about more than just like a name on a map. We're talking about different ways of seeing the world.
Absolutely. And what's really interesting here is that with this whole Gulf of America situation, different parts of the world are literally seeing the same map
Right.
in different ways.
Yeah, folks in the U.S. see one thing, those in Mexico another, and the rest of the world gets both.
Yeah.
That's got to have some consequences, right?
It definitely raises some concerns about potential for, miscommunication and misunderstanding.
Right.
If our maps, which are supposed to be, this common reference point, are diverging,
Right.
how can we hope to navigate global challenges together?
It's almost like we're losing a shared reality.
Maybe not. I mean, think about it. If something as fundamental as a map
Yeah.
can be subject to different interpretations, what does that say about our ability to agree on anything?
Wow, that's a really sobering thought.
Ugh.
So what can we do about it? It's not like we can force everyone to see the world the same way, right?
Of course not. But I think the first step is awareness.
Okay.
We need to be mindful of the fact that maps are not neutral. They reflect power dynamics, historical narratives, cultural perspectives.
So it's about acknowledging that there's inherent biases in any representation of the world.
Exactly. And it's also about recognizing the power of language.
Yeah.
Names have meaning, they evoke emotions, and they shape our perceptions.
So awareness is key, but then what can we as individuals do with that awareness?
Well, we can start by being more critical consumers of information.
Okay.
Don't just accept what you see on a map or, read in a headline. Dig deeper. Consider the source. Look for multiple perspectives.
So we can't just passively absorb information. We need to actively engage with it.
Exactly. And I think perhaps most importantly, we need to be willing to listen to and respect perspectives that differ from our own.
Okay.
Even if we disagree with a particular name or representation, we can still try to understand the historical, cultural, or political context that informs that perspective.
So it's about like having those tough conversations even when they're uncomfortable.
Yeah. Exactly, because ultimately it's through dialogue, understanding, and empathy that we can bridge those divides and build a more inclusive and interconnected world.
Hmm. It's fascinating how something as seemingly straightforward as a map can open up such profound questions about knowledge power and our shared reality.
It is, isn't it? And it just highlights the importance of staying curious,
Yeah,
asking questions, and constantly challenging our assumptions.
absolutely.
Yeah.
So as we wrap up this episode, let's leave our listener with a challenge. The next time you open up Google Maps or glance at a world atlas,
Mm.
take a moment to really think about what you're seeing.
Yeah.
Who created this map? What are their biases? What stories are being told? And whose voices are missing?
And remember, maps are powerful tools, but they're only as good as the information they contain and the intentions of those who create them.
Keep those questions in mind as you navigate the world, both literally and figuratively. And as always, stay curious, stay informed, and keep exploring.